So I want to pick your brain because I ended up with that Marlin.
I
Uh,
saw.
I know you probably know that boat because Dave, I think he picked your brain before he bought it, didn't he?
No, I thought that the one that David had was a skip marlin, but a subtech marlin, but I didn't know that
It
it was
is.
a
It
it
is.
was.
It was my bad. It was
Oh,
totally my
really?
bad. That's what
Okay.
happens. That's what happens when you film a video on 3 hours of sleep.
Right. Well, you could see more of it when I show up at Subfest or at Groton.
Well, I'm hoping it'll be done by that because I'm really seriously thinking about just hanging on to it for a shop boat. It's just a nice size, you know what I mean, for tucking
Whether
under your
it's
arm and
surface boat or a submarine, whatever you have, it's good to have something that you can just grab and throw in the water.
yeah, exactly. But I don't know anything. I've never built a Marlin. I don't know anything about that class or the history or the color scheme or
Or,
anything. So
or, or in the case of Ken, something you can keep in the water for an extended period.
yes.
Yeah, up to 8 months.
Yeah. Now, did I remember there's only two of those built or something like that, and they were like a prototype or something, weren't they?
David might know.
Yeah, they were built specifically to be training submarines to verse American and Allied interest on the new world of anti-submarine warfare. These things were built to represent the Soviet Union's advances in submarining post-war. They were target submarines.
Oh, interesting.
Weren't
Okay.
they used to train the destroyer guys in the Mediterranean?
Isn't that what I just said?
Okay.
Yeah, the thing is, we would put our ASW assets up against these guys, and because of their high performance, small signature, they were an elusive prey. So for us to have any chance against the Whiskies and Romeos of the time, we needed something more capable than a beefed up Gato.
And the mackerel, the sister ship, they actually had wheels on it. They put wheels on it to see, I guess, test going cruising along the bottom of the ocean.
Well, at the time we were developing what was called the K class, not to be confused with the British steamboats, which were supposed to be parked, if you will, even moored at the choke points, the Gulkuk and other choke points in the Atlantic and Pacific. These were to be small, inexpensive submarines, and one of the ploys was to, in littoral waters at least, to sit on the bottom, hence the wheels.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have the guts to drive a boat like that on the bottom. It feels a little risky.
No, that kind of thing was left to NR1 in Simon Lake. The wheels was strictly to keep the inductions out of the mud.
Well, when you have submarines like, what was it, the USS Greenville that ran into an underwater mountain,
Yeah.
crashed its bow and all that, I mean, you never know what you're going to encounter sitting on the bottom of, bottom of the ocean.
That'll teach you to keep your charts up to date.
Yeah.
Or pay attention to the charts in the first place.
Well, if you got any questions, if there's something I can help you with, just give me a call. You got my number.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And just for my brain percolate, they really didn't have, like a standard paint scheme. They're gray, right?
Nope, black. It gray because the one was painted gray that's on display.
Really?
You know how I know that? Because when I was at Squadron, I think it was Squadron 8 out of Key West, I was on the Trotta, and we would play games with anybody nearby. And one of the games we played was, I think it was on Marlin, T1 or T2, I forget which one. But one night I snuck on board up the Turtleback and took their commissioning pennant. They had to give us 5 gallons of ice cream to get it back.
Okay, so black if I want to go as operational, or gray if I want to a museum boat.
I painted
Hey.
I painted mine primer gray, and I'm like, yeah, that looks good enough. And then I just gave it a clear coat, and that was the end of it.
Well, it's probably a lot easier to track under the water, right? I
Well,
mean,
actually, when I lost it for 7 or 8 months underwater, when the guy, a guy there knew that I had lost it, and he would go down and look for it, and he was there at the right time of the day where the sun was shining, the water was clear, and he could see the lightness of the submarine with the primer that I had painted it. If it would have been black, he might not have seen it. So then he went out in his rowboat, and they grabbed it in 4 feet of water. So, that kind of helped.
Paint it pink and put it up for the cancer this year.
yeah. It's too nice for that, though. I don't know. Maybe if I can't get it working.
Too nice for that. Yeah, right. Too nice for cancer?
I'm sure Bob can find something else to put up.
Yeah, well,
Pair of Dave's old pink panties, right? That he used to sport when Mike ran the joint.
Hey, Rick, go fuck yourself.
Well, Bob had a whole van load of submarines that he can use for that.
yeah.
You could
Well, there's a
paint
bunch.
You could paint the Gato pink, and you got Operation Petticoat.
Yeah, there you go. So I have a question for Ray, because this came up on YouTube. And actually, I should pull up the guy's name. You need to settle something about your sea view. Now, let me pull this up here first of all. So you built your big 48 scale sea view, but you made it truncated, right? It was shorter. Now, the question is, because there's apparently, I've heard a rumor, and then this guy is trying to educate me on you. I had heard a rumor that you did it intentionally so it would fit in your vehicle, and he's doing it because he said you made a massive error and you were beside yourself, that you overlooked a massive detail and you built it too short. So you need to set the record straight.
No, it had to fit into my Mitsubishi van. So it was
Okay.
7.5 feet. So I removed 1 foot, and Frank put the 1.5 feet back, actually 8.5 feet.
Right. Okay. This makes me feel a lot better about
So that's 1990.
Okay.
In a 1989 Mitsubishi van.
If the person you're talking about watches these dive tribes, we had discussed it, and I know that because the term of Ray's Mitsubishi I used to call the mystery machine, because it sort of reminded me of that.
Ray, what was your documentation?
I have a whole book of still photographs that I took off the TV.
Yeah.
That was my documentation until I found your pictures of the 17-footer or 18-footer.
Yeah.
Then I said, because at that time nobody was questioning me, and if they did, I said, make your own at 8.5 feet. That's okay with me.
Good.
But in 1989, 1990, when I was working on this thing, it was all like, I just sketched from the television picture, which was the 3x4, but not even the high definition that you see now on MeTV.
Yeah.
At 2:00 in the morning.
Well,
So
that is good.
I've been there, done that. Frank, I bless Frank for reenacting the or resurrecting it.
And I took Ray's diameter, and then what facts what fake facts I got about the sea view's length, and that was a little ambiguous. I just set up a ratio between diameter to diameter from length to X, and I solved it, and that's where I came up with 104 inches, which is about 8.5 feet. So I blew everything up to that.
Mm-hmm. So Ray, do you know this gentleman? Because apparently he knows you, Paul Lubliner.
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah.
sure. Sure, I know him.
Why is everybody laughing?
This is like old classmates.
He goes way back.
Paul actually knew Mrs. Irwin Allen, and he remade the model that is in the captain's cabin, the dark model that is the 8-window version.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a long time ago, he had that model. He rebuilt it for Mrs. Irwin Allen. He found out that there were 12 windows on it. The original model had 12 windows, which were the two back windows were filled in, or the four windows were filled in by putty. And he told me he gave me a lot of very good information.
Well, Paul is one of the finest model builders I know. And if anybody has got the dope on Seaview and a lot of other things, particularly trains, he's the guy.
Well, he wrote about a 45-page essay and posted it on YouTube about how his boats are like the most wonderful thing in the world, and how Ray was so distraught when he saw his model that it's all up there very, anyhow.
Not very gracious, but if anybody.
Well, no, he was a real good guy. Yeah. I went to see him in California when I had a job out there, and I mean we were like brothers, like instantaneously. He had an 8-foot Seaview that he made from the original nose.
Yeah,
I think that was going around to all the special effects guys, and it was in a TV show called The Fabulous World of Irwin Allen, or something to that effect. And it's yeah, June Lockhart. Yeah, right. And she has it. She's standing next to it, and he did a fabulous job on it. And that was way after my boat was in the water working, and I was happy that my boat could fit in my van.
Yeah. All right. Well, I was just super curious because I had heard that you had, done it intentionally to fit in your van, and he's like, no, that's not the case. He got all this stuff wrong, and I set him straight, and he cried and all this stuff. So it's whatever.
Well, okay. That's okay. Well, Rich remembers the first Subregatta. He and his wife Susan.
Yeah.
He saw it there for the first time. I think that was 92 or 93.
92 or 93.
Yeah.
I took 5,000 pictures in Bug Joe.
I remember. You're in the video. You and
I
Susan
built my own then, but I did come back with or two.
Well, at that point, I had enough. That was it. I had the 7-footer. That was it. It was working. And then it sat in my pool for the next 10 years. And then in the backyard. And then Frank said, I want it.
Gotcha.
And now you have it.
It wound up in the right hands.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And I do want to give a huge shout out to Frank, because this is the first time I've seen in person, the kind of work that he's managed to put out, and what he handed over to me was so much more than what I was expecting. It was as a gorgeous boat. So shout out to Ray for modeling the original, and to Frank for massaging it into what it was. And this hopefully this model in particular is going to be out on public display at a classic car museum. So it'll get the attention and recognition that it deserves. So you just needed a slightly bigger van, Ray, because it'll fit in a standard Chrysler minivan with 3/4 of an inch to spare. All you needed to do is buy another vehicle for your submarine. That sounds like a smart thing to do, right?
I'm not making another one. I'll take pictures of Frank's, and that's it.
All right.
He's my co-pilot.
Very cool. One of the other comments that was actually really funny on there, they're talking about the how in Europe, this guy's in Amsterdam and he's got friends who's like in Friesland and it's 140 kilometers away. And he's like, everybody's like, that's so far. I can't drive that far. We did just like just under 2,000 miles in 2 days. So it was a fun trip, and I loved hooking up with everybody up there in New York. That was a blast.
The usual suspects.
The usual suspects, exactly. On late notice too. And I was like changing the calendar on everybody, and that was all my fault, because when I was picking dates, I was looking at the February calendar instead of the March calendar, so everything was offset by a day. Which was a big deal because I rented my rental vehicle for the wrong period of time, and then when I found out it was too late and they didn't have one, so I had to rent from another. And all good though. All right, so it's 5 after 3. We're now officially into DiveTribe March 9th, 2024. It is my birthday tomorrow, just letting you know.
We all sing happy birthday.
No, I'll mute you. All good.
What do you be?
What am I gonna be tomorrow?
Yeah.
49.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah, one more year
crap.
until my warranty's up.
Want to trade?
I shouldn't say that. I think in my mind, it was when I hit 40. That's when everything all went downhill for me from a health perspective.
Just ask your kid.
Oh, Kurt Kramer's coming in. That's cool. So Kurt booked a consult with me, which was really cool. I had a chance to talk with him. He's got some questions about his little 77th Nautilus build. He's the gentleman who's the professional monster truck driver. If you guys remember, he had his little intro there a while ago. So I got to get with him. He's going to be down here in Houston, so I'm going to actually grab Logan. We're going to go out and they're showing off their vehicles in Southeast Houston. So we're gonna go walk around there. He's going to give us some behind the scenes tour of the monster truck world. Trying to think of other news from the Drydocks. I can't really think of too much, which is good. Before we get into Dave's second half of the mold making presentation, which I understand is the meat and potatoes of, we kind of got background and application last time, and now we'll get into the hows and whys and all of that stuff. And I do want to make a special note that, like, my mold making prowess or lack thereof is all a result of Dave too, imparting his knowledge to me. I had fudged my way through things, but I was at that one time we were making, gosh, I think it was spin cast molds. I don't remember what kit it was, but he had me in there making the spin cast molds. So that was a real education there. But so again, it was all thanks to Dave and his vast.
Bob, your microphone's a little staticky.
Uh-oh. I
don't know, anybody else hearing it?
Yeah.
Oh. Huh. I don't know. Okay, hold on. I'll fix it.
Beep. How's that?
Give us a sound check.
Checking. 1, 2, 3.
Weak. You just dropped it.
Oh man.
Sounds like you're real far away from the mic.
Well, I am.
All right, I just flipped it back. Is it still staticky?
Seems okay.
All right.
You're better.
I guess I'll just stop talking then. I don't know. All right.
Dirty switch.
So let's take a couple of minutes and just open it up, because it's actually been a little while before we've had a chime in from the group. Is anybody working on anything they want to bring to everybody's attention? Questions?
Open up with something.
Yeah.
I got my new 900 megahertz radio. Throw it off. And Ed and Bob really got me going on this. And I did find the on and off button okay. And that's about as far as I've gone with it. So I'm going to put this transmitter and the new 300 Easy Driver, and I got to give a shout out to Jason to what a beautiful job he did on that cylinder. It's just gorgeous. And so that'll be going into the 212 or and the radio and that cylinder will go into that particular boat. And I'm in the process right now of getting it all 3D printed, and I've started to glue up and everything on it. So that'll be coming down the pike, and then I'll probably run into some issues with this until I get there. I don't know how far into it you got before you shipped it.
It is fully programmed, fully set up. You got the key fobs in the radio case, so you've got remote on off in your cylinder, so that's all set up for you. So it's plug and play. You just need to make sure you plug the right stuff into the right slots of your receiver, and you're good to go.
Okay, that's great, Bob, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate that key, Bob. I wasn't expecting that, so thank you very much. Oh, and the other question is, where is the charging situation on the radio for charging the battery?
Right up on the very top, you're going to see a like a USB-C little port. So just like your cell phone, you just plug it in there, and in your case is the charging cable.
Okay. All right. I guess I didn't get into that part of it yet. All right, that's great. And there's a lot of YouTube stuff out there on it that Ed kind of led me to, and looking forward to it. It's a beautiful system, and I'm really looking forward to both of them together to see what they'll do.
And just the clarification for those guys who aren't familiar with what he's holding there, it's not actually only a 900 megahertz radio. It's actually what they call tandem. So it runs both 2.4 and 900 megahertz. But in this particular application, because I'm assuming Rob's not going to want to run, those 2.4 antennas out the boat or anything, it'll primarily be running off of 900 the vast majority of the time. And I think I set the output power of the transmitter at 250 milliwatts, but you can play around with that. That's going to be plenty. Ed, when he ran his crick out at the Sylvan Rodriguez Park, was running at 25 milliwatts, and you're running at 10 times that. So you should have lots and lots of juice to play with.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Is it King Kelly? Is that, or is it King Kel? You're muted.
Pardon?
It's actually Kinkle.
Kinkle, okay.
How deep can you guys go at 900? I've got a 900 on a sub for swimming pools, but
it depends 100% on what you're running in, and so like in a pool situation, it depends how chlorinated it is. When my pool's just been shocked, I'll get 4 feet pretty easily at maybe like 20 feet away, like in the middle of the pool kind of a scenario. And that's at 250 milliwatts. And you can go up to a watt with those units.
all right. And then anybody go play out in a lake or freshwater?
You'll get better. And again, well, I mean, everybody knows it's a function of distance and depth. So the further away you get, the shallower you need to be. But also, from a good news perspective, the further away you get, the shallower you're going to want to be anyway. It's not like you're going to be, driving at 5 feet deep, 150 feet away. That would be ridiculous. So for the most part, you'll probably be hanging out at around periscope depth, when it's at any real distance. So when it's close and you can see what it's doing under the water, you'll get lots of depth to play with. Not 30 feet, or anything like that, but plenty to have fun with.
No.
Is that John Kinkle?
Yes, who's that?
You did Rick Teskey. Hi, how are you doing?
Good, I recognized your name.
I was going to say, I recognize you did early work with the flying sub and your little jet drive dollar store toys you put in them.
Yeah, I was
From
a
the
drop for
monogram
jet
kit
drives.
about 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
I'm on version 3 now.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
Anyway, nice meeting you again.
Nice meeting you. Nice meeting
On
you.
the show.
And thanks, David Mariner. He sent me some of my first push rod seals.
I'm so
Very
sorry.
And actually, another shout out to actually two people. First of all, to Ed, and then to Frank. So a thank you on behalf of Logan. He's the proud new owner of that Teskey. So I guess I should actually thank Rick too. He was the very, very first one for producing that big Proteus, that 30-inch Proteus model. So I think if I understand, Rick produced it, and then I don't know if Ed was the original owner, but he was certainly an owner, and then it ended up going to like Frank, and Frank held on to it, and then Frank donated it to Logan. So he's really excited about it.
You have to add Ray in there.
Okay.
Because Ray got it from Rick, Ed got it from Ray, Frank got it from Ed, and Logan has it from Frank.
Well,
Now,
So that model kit is communicable.
yes.
Was that your raffle prize win, Ray?
That's right. Back in 2002, I think.
Before the base shut down. Anyway,
No, it was in Rhode Island.
I thought it was at the base. Okay, well, either way, that's number 4 out of the mold. Dave has number 2. Ed has number 3. I got number 1, and I think I only popped 8 or 9 out of the molds. The first 4 or 5 were done with a spray up with a chop gun by another commercial guy, and then I started laying it by hand, and nobody ever put any more interest in it, so I never did anymore. So it is indeed pretty rare.
So you still have the tools?
They're there, but they suffered. The last pull I tried pulling out, I don't know, something was dished in the sides of the upper cabin, and I don't know whether it had just been pulled away from too many years of waxing and not stripping it back down to the gel and re-waxing. And I just said, screw it, didn't bother, put it back up in the rafters and left it. They're still there, but how they would turn out, I don't know.
It was a nice piece of work.
Yeah, Logan is excited because originally he started work on that little plastic model because he's addicted to detailed painting. And we got to thinking maybe we would RC that, but now it's like, why would we mess around with little baby toys when we can mess around with the big boy version? So I think that's
why I gave it to him. He was talking about that little one, and I'm saying, I'm never going to get to this, and you might as well enjoy it. So he was so enthused about it. So
him and Ed have battle bots.
Yeah. So now he and I, and it has to be when Renee travels because there's no way she'd watch it. I'm sure we need to queue up and watch Fantastic Voyage because I've never seen it. So,
Bob,
are
we still on for Friday?
Yes.
Then we will watch it, and
okay.
I will bring down everything for Logan on my interim build here, including. And it's great we have the same Snapmaker machine, including the CNC files if he wants to fabricate parts from 1/32. I got all those files. I have the files for the Halo. I have a spare Halo dome for him. I have a lot of stuff. I'm gonna get him when I get
that is awesome. That's awesome. He's going to be so excited.
Look, mine's been on the bench since 2001, no, 2002, Rick, sometime that frame. I'm betting Logan will have it in the water before I have mine. Okay. That's what I'm thinking.
And I was so worried about you being slighted by me giving it to him, but he's going to do it and he's going to enjoy it. So that's what I figured.
You've never seen Fantastic Voyage, Bob?
I have not. No.
Wow.
Friday
Wow.
night. Friday night.
Okay. Yep.
YouTube the other night. So it is out there.
We'll find it. We'll find it. We'll watch it in the theater room. Again, now Renee will just be back from her. Or wait, no, she'll be here. It'll have been fine. She will probably be watching something else in the bedroom while we watch that in the theater.
Popcorn, Bob. Popcorn.
Popcorn makers in the corner of the room. You saw it. All right. Good stuff. All right, we're at 3:20. Let's turn things over to Dave. He can do part 2 of mold making, and then we will wrap things up with another little round table. And I also want to talk about getting back to a couple of other series that we used to do with these dive tribes. We'll get your feedback and comments. So I'm going to open up the sharing, and Dave can take it away.
All righty. Okay. Bear with me just a moment while I goof around with this thing. Share. New share. Huh. Well, I had it all loaded up on this end. Let me try it again. Okay, lecture. There we are. All right, thanks for bearing with me. All right, I already covered what resin casting is, and if you don't know, I mean, it's nothing more than a repetitive process of producing parts, more than one part in an identical configuration. It's akin to metal casting or vacuum forming or any number of the repeatable processes. The advantage of resin casting is its relative speed and particularly the relative ease that your typical model builder can employ this technique to first render tools from which parts are made, and then to make the parts from those tools using a resin that changes state once it's catalyzed. All right, I got as far as why resin casting, and we're going to start with this photograph here. Why would you do it? Well, as I mentioned, repeatability. Now, I would counsel against most hobbyists engaging in this activity unless they have a real screaming need for precise duplication of a particular part or parts. I gave the example, the casual hobbyist who might need 20 lifeboats for an ocean liner. Yeah, this process makes sense. So you only have to make one master, and then you make one tool, and then you cast 20 parts. It's a viable process if that's the need. But if you're building a submarine or a ship or an airplane one time, and you need a part, then just scratch build the part and be done with it. That'll be an element of your finished model. But if you need replication, then you make a tool, and then you make the required number of parts, such as the case here. I want to further explain who has the need as opposed to a hobbyist or our professionals. Ellie and I built stuff for industry, specifically defense clients in the motion picture TV industry, where we did have to build multiples of a specific item. A case in point, when we were working on Star Trek: The Next Generation, they had a new class of Vulcan ship, and this is in the era of actual physical miniatures. So we would get the job of building warp engines and other peripherals for the principal model builder for that show, who was Greg Jean. So in this case, he needed 2 warp engine masters, which I cast from resin. And this is the example. As you can see, 2 identical items, each comprising 3 pieces. And as time is money in any game, this was the way to do it. Instead of building 2 very involved masters, we built 1 master, made a tool, and then cast up the 2 required parts. Resin casting, you wouldn't think that 1 item would be worthwhile making a tool for. An example is this cupola for a Sherman tank. This particular cupola, which is where the commander would sit, had I think it was 6 identical gores which made up this structure. And since they were all identical in that the very complicated shape you see in foreground is a periscope, which used a prismatic lens, which became a periscope. Since it had 6 sides, all I had to do was produce 1 gore, a portion of a disc, and then make a tool from that, and then cast the required number of gores, and then assemble them into the final piece, which would become a master unto itself, from which tank parts would be made. So this is another example of why you would get into resin casting, is that you start with a master, you make a tool, a mold, and then from that you make the required number of parts. In this case, some assemblies to an eventual, what we would call an intermediate master. Resin casting has some virtues that other processes don't have. Vacuum forming, which most of the structure of this enterprise model was made from, lend itself to lightweight, thin structures. However, vacuum forming does not lend itself to capturing intricate shapes, particularly tight corners, severe drafts, or even negative drafts. That is to say, eventual items that have an undercut or vertical faces. Resin casting suits itself to those items because the tool itself is rubber and will permit you to distort the tool upon extraction of first the master and then eventually the parts themselves. So the high detail items on this enterprise model were rendered as masters, and then tools were made, and then cast resin pieces were formed. Here you can see the differences in techniques. Here we have vacuum formed structures of the enterprise, and here we have specific masters which will be turned into tools to produce cast resin pieces. As you can see, these are involved rather intricate shapes, whereas the rest of the enterprise, the primary hull, warp engine, secondary hull, were all rather simplistic geometries, whereas the cast resin pieces, because of their complicated geometry, I chose to eventually render those as cast resin pieces. So that's the reason why. Another reason why is here we have more vacuum formed structures. These engine nozzles were best formed from vacuum formed structures, but the injectors in the power heads, because they were a bit more involved, these toroidal structures and flanges kind of required, because of their severe undercuts, required the use of a rubber tool to make cast resin pieces, which in the final assembly, when joined with the vacuum formed pieces, became a model unto themselves, sub-assemblies. So these are reasons why you would get into resin casting. Resin casting, of course, demands that you have a tool. But before you can have a tool, you have to have a master or a pattern. And here, alluding back to that first picture I showed you today of that warp engine for a Klingon ship, started out as a single master of the subassemblies. And then here you see these boxes formed to contain the liquid rubber after it had been catalyzed, so that it would change state to a solid and become the tool used to make the cast resin parts. So the process of resin casting starts with a master and then a containment before you can pour the rubber. Then the rubber is poured, it hardens, you remove the rubber from the master, and that becomes the tool from which you'll form your cast resin pieces. The fundamental thing about resin casting, unless you're a thief, is to do your own work, which means you got to start with a master, which means you got to be a model builder, heaven forbid. Well, what is that? That's beyond the preview of this little discussion, but this gives you a little taste of what goes through when you start making the masters to produce the tools to produce the parts in resin. These are some shop sketches supplemented by studio drawings of the sea view. All this went together to make a fittings kit for one of the DeBoer sea views. So it's model building 101. And I'll go back to my first talk and remind you that if you want a part, make it yourself, make the master. If you are going to use somebody else's work, a kit part or something you bought commercially, get their permission or buy as required number of those things as you need. Just don't think you have license to take somebody else's hard work and use it for your own. It's not yours, it's somebody else's. So don't be a thief. That's what I'm saying. And yeah, you can argue, oh, it's just for me. No, it doesn't wash. You're either a model builder or you're not. Getting back to that cupola, the initial master, it was easier to go ahead and face turn the entire disc, which is the cupola itself, but only to identify the gores and just to build one of the gores up to the required standard. Here you see that work underway. The bezel retaining ring was an acid etched item, which was then attached to a piece of styrene sheet, which in turn was cut out and then mounted onto its gore location. You can just see the tick marks on the jig I have here, which identify the gores. So after I built this master to this degree, I then separated that gore and used it to make a tool, this item here, which in turn was used to produce the 6 required gores, which were then assembled into the intermediate master, which became the proper pattern from which the production tool would be made. So here you see the, if you will, the steps involved. You make a master, you make a tool, you make a part, and if required, that part is an element of a larger assembly, which becomes a production master. Is everybody clear so far? I'll take silence as concurrence. Further work on that master, you can see I've already put the gores together, and I'm already in the process of filling the seams between each and starting to detail the access hatch itself. And this is pretty much the finished master work on this. I think it was 1/16 scale Sherman turret. So all of this has been scratch built, and most of the structure has been done in Wren shape, whereas the other items were machined from metal or cast resin. So that's how involved resin casting can get by necessity. The trick to good model building is selecting the appropriate technique for a specific job. That's the most difficult learned lesson in this game, is one, amazing all of the skills of the various fabrication techniques, and then gaining the wisdom to determine which technique to employ for a specific job. The final detailing were what they call foundry markings, which go on big forgings or cast items. In this case, foundry marks on the mantle and other items were acid etched, cut out, applied to the master, and then the master eventually used to make production parts. By the time we went to market on this thing, Maya came out with a plastic model kit, making this a colossal wasted effort. Now, we're getting into tool making, the actual rubber mold. Nothing illustrates mold design better than a tree of cast resin pieces still attached to their sprue. This is the sprue, channels, and vent network. The idea is to produce a pressure head. Gravity is your friend. You pour liquid resin into the top. It goes down the sprue. Gravity forces, of course, the resin into its channels and then into the bottom of all the cavities, which will give form to the eventual parts. Now, as the resin fills a cavity, it has to displace the air, and that air needs a path to get out. And that's what you're seeing here. These are the vent channels or vent network, which eventually lead to the top of the tool. So you have two basic networks. You have the network of the sprue and channels to introduce resin, and then you have the network of vents, which get rid of the displaced air. Proper tool design is everything, and it's something you learn, or at least you study photos like this, and you get an idea how to make a tool. Notice also that not only are you going to cast resin, but you also have the option to encapsulate mandrels or other items which can be used to render hollow bores, or actually be encapsulated for keeps to become operating shafts and other items. You see these dark projections here. Some of these parts are rather thin of section, and since it's a practical RC submarine, they'll be subject to breakage upon collision or mishandling. Therefore, sometimes I will introduce carbon fiber into the tool cavity during assembly prior to pouring, and this will encapsulate, and it just like rebar and reinforced cement, the carbon will absorb the resin and greatly strengthen the torsional and lateral strength of the item, particularly these rudders and well, vertical and horizontal stabilizers on a little Alpha class submarine. You're sure as shooting gonna be breaking these off when you hit. So you take efforts during design of the tooling to make provisions for strengthening members like carbon fiber. Just one trick for practical use. Now, the rubber used itself, and I want to thank Ken for posting addresses and part numbers of the resins and the rubbers you can use. Polytech and BJB are the ones I prefer, but you've got Smooth On and other outfits out there that make equivalent products. It's whatever you get comfortable with. But here you see mold making rubber, and in foreground and in the back you see masters which have been prepared for the first pour, like these ones in foreground, and masters which are ready for the second pour here with blue tape wrapped around them. I favor the two half type of tool, simple. There's a top and a bottom, or a left and a right, and there's a flange line between the two halves of the tool. And it's along that flange line where you introduce your sprue, your fill, and your vent channeling. More on that later, but here's your typical rubber. The chemistry is either a platinum cure or a tin cure. Platinum is preferred. The only thing you got to be careful with is when you're making your masters or you're using tape as a containment, is that with platinum cure, you have to avoid anything that's got sulfur in it. The sulfur will inhibit the cure of the rubber. So that's a hard-learned lesson and something you should know. And also, when you get these rubbers, there's always a product guide sheet, which will give you the characteristics of the material, its properties, as well as the do's and don'ts as far as humidity, temperature, and chemistry of the joining pieces or containments. So read that stuff, it's important. Tool making is nothing more than mixing up your rubber, and that is the rubber itself, in the appropriate catalyst, and then pouring it over the masters, which are sitting within an appropriate containment. Now, during the mixing process, you can't help but fold in air bubbles, and these bubbles will manifest later as dimples in a pressure cast tool, and you got to avoid that. So what you do is you de-air the rubber while it's still in a liquid state. Here I am using a vacuum machine, and I'm taking it down to a hard vacuum, about 29 inches of mercury. You see the frothing of the rubber here. And those are the bubbles coming out of the mixture and being evacuated by the pump. About a minute of de-airing is all you need. Your typical rubber curing time is at least, you got a pot life of at least a half hour. And in that time, you got plenty of time to de-air and pour. So there's no rush. Resin, on the other hand, if I could back up a little bit, typically you got a pot life of 30 to 60 seconds. So that's something else, and I'll get into that later. But getting back to the rubber, you mix it up, you de-air it, and then you're ready to pour it onto the containment that makes the tool. An alternative, if you don't have a vacuum pump, is to pressurize the rubber as it changes state from liquid to solid. And that takes about 12 hours. So what you do, I'm using a pressure pot, which is nothing more than a spray, an industrial spray pot, which is good for 2 atmospheres, which is fine. You take your tool, once it's been filled with a liquid rubber, while it's still in the liquid state, you put that tool in the pot, and then you take the pot down to 2 atmospheres, 30 psi. And that's PSIG gauge. 1 atmosphere is what we're experiencing right now, and then you just go 14 more PSI and you're at 2 atmospheres. And that's enough to crush any bubbles that are in the rubber solution back in the solution. So you will not have any distortions in the finished castings. So you can either pull a vacuum to de-air the rubber, or you can push any air bubbles into solution through pressure as the rubber changes state. Now, a typical tool design starts like this. Your masters are mounted on a mold board. The indentations in the face here are used to make little keying dimples, which will, when the rubber tool is cast over the masters, you can see those dimples, of course, are positives now, whereas the masters have become negatives. And this is the first half of your typical tool. this one, of course, is for one of our WTCs back in the day. Now, something Ken asked for before, and I assured him that it was covered, and here it is. So, can you use something as simple as plasticine, an oil-bearing clay, to become your temporary mold? Yes, I had a need for streamlined little shapes, which were zincs, which are predominantly seen on the Type 212s. So I needed a bunch of those real quick, and I didn't want to make a rubber tool. So the thing I'm pressing into the clay is this teardrop shape, which I'm embossing into the surface of the clay. So the clay itself becomes my mold. I spray it with some part release, and then I troll on some resin. And later, when that resin cures, I can snap out each little zinc piece I need. And here's that positive. You take a look again at the negative, which is this piece of clay, which has been embossed with the required shape. And then after the resin has been put in, you see the teardrop shapes. Of course, I destroy the clay tool, but now I've got enough of these things to last me a lifetime. Tool making, the previous tool I showed you was for gravity pores, where we're either using the pressure head, which is a consequence of the height of the sprue, or I'm using a pressure assist. And all that requires is gravity and perhaps the application of pressure. And I'll get into that later when I describe casting proper. In some cases, you need a tool that spins, a disc. Bob alluded to this while he was here once. This is the process of making a disc tool. This is for spin casting, where we take the phenomenon of centrifugal force to actually force liquid metal or resin from the center of the tool, which is set to rotate. Centrifugal force drives the metal or the resin into the cavities of the tool, which is spinning at a pretty reasonable rate. The first step in the process is to design the mold board, which is a disc, and then to array the masters around this disc so they got a pretty good distribution of weight. That is to say, it's balanced reasonably well. And this is the preliminary step of making a disc tool, is laying out the masters in an array that one will get the metal to the cavities, and two, that the items once filled will have a weight that's pretty close to putting the center of gravity near the center of rotation. We're not going fast enough where it's that critical, but it's just good housekeeping to be cognizant of that when you design a disc type tool. Most of you will never have a need for this. What I'm into is in production. Ellie and I made a lot of stuff, identical stuff. We made it all the time. Therefore, we had to embrace techniques like resin casting or metal casting. And this is one of the things you have to do. Most of you guys won't have to. This is just kind of nice to know stuff. In process of making the disc tool, I go ahead and I cut out a disc, and then I cover it with clay, and then I embed the masters halfway into the clay, so that when I cast the first half of the disc tool, I will not encapsulate the parts. Only one half, or approximately one half of the part, will be encapsulated, not the entire piece. This way, I've established a flange, and I have a way of removing the masters later and setting things up for creation of the second tool half. So here I'm ready to pour the first tool half. You notice these tubes here, outboard, are for studs, which are used to clamp the two halves of the tool in place during the casting operation. The center tube here is the sprue through which the eventual liquid resin will pour, and then centrifugal force will drive the resin, or in this case metal, out into the cavities. The simplest form of creating a multi-piece tool is to go ahead and encapsulate the master and then come back and very carefully to slit the tool and open it up and underline carefully so that your knife does not intrude in and damage your master, because you might need it again. So here I've already started to make the incisions, and I'm starting to pull it apart. To ensure good registration of the two halves of this tool, you notice the wavy line I've introduced on the outside on the initial cuts. This, of course, creates a keying network which will ensure proper registration of the two halves of the tool. Once that half is done, then I make a third element, which is in this case going to be the core to a tail cone. And within this master, I had also provided metal rods which would give form to bores, which would later be evidenced in the cast resin piece as bores for the operating shafts for the stern planes and rudders. That'll become evident later when you see the cast pieces that I make from this rubber tool. Notice at the top, this is where I will eventually pour the resin to fill the cavity, and these two chimneys here are for the vent network, which will ensure displaced air finds a path out of the cavities so that I can get a complete fill. So this rather complicated tool, a three-piece tool, will be used to make tail cones, I think, for the blueback, the 196 blueback kit, which I sent to Bob to make kits of. And here you can see that tool after I've started casting up tail cones. I'm holding in my right hand here the mandrel, which was used to give form to this hole at the stern, which in turn is sized to fit oil light bearings. And you can just barely see the holes here, and you can't see them here, but this is where those rods projected out of the tool, which gave form to these bores for the rudder and stern plane operating shafts. So this is as complicated as it can get. Well, it can get even weirder, which you'll see, but more on that later. Another look here is the core piece. Inside is more rubber, which renders a hollow structure, which of course I need so I can get the yokes back there, as well as the drive shaft. And you can see the extensive array of indexing, whatever you want to call them. This just ensures good registration. Tool making 101. You mix up your rubber and you pour your rubber into the tools. I like to do it in mass. So if I have a requirement for a tool this week, I'll go ahead and I'll embed the stuff in the clay, but I'll set it aside until the following week where I'll probably need some more tools. Well, at the end of the month, I've got enough tools now. It's worth my while to mix up a significant batch of rubber and go through the process of making, in this case, the first half of the tools. Notice the clay. This is a disc type spin casting tool. This is a gravity tool, as are the rest of these tools here. The simplest tool to make is the vacuum assisted process, where you actually provide the cavities, but with only one sprue entrance, which instead of a long sprue channel takes the form of a trough. This is for vacuum assisted casting. So the masters were laid in clay, 2 halves were formed, and then I cut out this big cavity in both halves, and that became the trough through which the resin is introduced. I'll explain the vacuum assisted process later, but this does demonstrate how simple it can get. Typical tools which have been manufactured, and they're all set ready for casting. Notice that most of the work is either a 2 or a 3-piece type tool, which is held together firmly with strong backs, themselves secured with rubber bands. The resin is introduced through a sprue in the top, or if it's vacuum assisted, some resin is introduced into the trough, and you take it from there. Typical resin cure times, you can demold in about 45 minutes. If I'm going to demold thin walled structures in 45 minutes, I typically have a tub of water nearby. And since the resin has a specific gravity pretty close to water, even though they're a little floppy when they come out of the tool, I toss them into the water. And since they have shape memory to them, and they're buoyed in the water, they'll assume their proper shape again, and then finish the cure in water. This is your typical resin casting material. It's a polyurethane. Alumilite is the one I prefer. In foreground, you see various tools here and cast resin pieces produced within them. Pressure casting is a process where you mix up your resin, and of course, during that mixing process, you're folding in bubbles, and bubbles in the cast resin pieces are voids. And those voids, of course, are something you have to address later. Better not to have them. So what you do is, once you fill a tool with resin, you subject it to 1 or 2 atmospheres, and you hold that for the cure time, typically an hour. And then you can take the pressure pot, back to atmosphere, open the hatch and demold the piece, and then repeat the casting process. These are custom built pots. So when we were doing some commercial work back in the day, today most of my work is easily done in a commercially bought spray pressure pot that you saw earlier. Like these. You get these at Harbor Freight for $100. I'm sure Bob has his array of pressure pots somewhere in his shop.
Same ones that you have. You put me onto them.
Yeah. Guilty as charged. And here's a typical array of stuff for doing resin casting. Since most of the resins are measured by weight, you need a scale. You need a mixing cup and something to mix with. You need a part release, which is a spray which goes into the tool face on the flanges and the cavities. And then you give it a good shot of talc, or what's the other one? God damn it, I keep forgetting. Hard to get.
Cornstarch.
What?
Was it cornstarch?
Cornstarch, thank you. Is that Ken?
That's Bob.
Hey, thanks, Bob. Cornstarch, and again, because it's hygroscopic, it absorbs any water that was in the air, which ensures a good casting. Also, it helps wick resin into the sharp creases, angles, and undercuts that might be unique to a particular cavity in your tool. So you spray on the part release, and then you dust things down with cornstarch or talc. You shake out the excess, assemble the tool, measure your resin, pour it in the tool. Then the tool, while the resin is still in the liquid state, goes into the pot. You take the pot down to 2 atmospheres, wait an hour, and repeat the cycle. That's resin casting in a nutshell. It's what I call a gravity pressure assisted resin casting.
Dave, not to interrupt, the mixing cup, is there any difference in having a waxed cup and a non-waxed cup? Is that important?
No, I haven't found any chemical interaction between polyurethanes or epoxy and the wax lined cups. Good point though. Something to be cognizant of when you're mixing paint. So here's your typical gravity pressure assisted tool. Notice that I've actually made use of some of the model parts that are being produced to form not only the cavities for what will be foundations for WTCs, but they also serve, the cavities do, briefly as the sprue from which all the other cavities receive through channeling the resin required. Notice the judicious use of carbon fiber to make terribly stiff and strong these items, which are what I call capture lips, is one of my techniques of holding hull halves together when they're assembled. So carbon fiber is introduced before the 2 halves of the tool are put together. And they wick out very quickly. So you get complete fills. But here you can see the sprue and the vent network, both leading to the top of the tool. And this is typical of a gravity pressure assisted casting operation. Similar tools, more carbon reinforcement. These are masts. These are sail pieces, foundations for the top of a sail, because I like to represent the mast extended or retracted. So you need these internal workings, and these items were for various kits, fittings kits we were producing at the time. More looks, again, the best way to analyze how a tool is made is to take a look at the end product before the parts are removed. You get a good picture of how the sprue and vent networks are arranged. Spin casting, most of the time I use it for metal casting, but it has on occasion utility for resin casting. In this case, I was building for a client a series of NR1 submarines. They were only 12 inches long at 1/96 scale. And I found it the best way to do is to take the mold of the hull, mount it vertically on a variable speed drill, get it up to speed, introduce the resin at the top here through the open sprue, and centrifugal force would drive the resin into all of the faces of the cavity, which gave form to the hull. Little caveman, but it worked. And the end result, one of those models, the NR1. It's only 12 inches long. Ken was talking about wheels, huh? Obviously, when they were messing around with the T-boats, somebody was thinking, or at least looking to the future. The most complicated resin tools I've ever created are for pump jets, because I want to capture as many elements of a pump jet in a single casting as possible. So here I'm capturing not only the tail cone section, but the stator elements, which also support this portion of the duct. And you can see it's a multi-piece tool. Most of it was cut away very carefully from the master to give me an accessible rubber tool. That tool going together, another tool in standby, and here you see the finished pieces. Basically, I had two castings. One was the after portion of the duct with its post swirl stator, and the forward portion of the duct attached to the tail cone through the pre-swirl array of stators. These items on top of the castings are a concession to the need to remove all bubbles, because these would be spin cast, in that the resins introduced from the center of the tool, centrifugal force throws it out to the outboard portions of the tool, which in this case are the ducts in the stators. But I also needed on top of these items to collect the bubbles, and the inevitable bubbles, because of the thin section of the stators. Bubbles would collect in what I call a bubble catcher, which is a sacrificial piece of resin, which is an integral part of the tool. That's where the bubbles would collect. And you can see those little vent channels at the top there. So with a little care while spinning, when I initially introduced the stuff, resin would start splashing over the top. You can see it in this one containment here because of these little vents, but they were small enough so that as soon as I saw that resin escaping from the top of the tool, I knew to turn the machine off, leave it alone until the resin cured. Then I could disassemble and remove the part. This is the most bizarro stuff I've ever done. And here's a typical spin casting tool used for resin work. This is for a 148 pump jet. And here you see the 148 pump jet, an assembled cast resin unit and parts in foreground here, and the tools used to give them shape. Assembling a spin casting tool on the spin casting machine, which is a modified blood separation centrifuge, which is hooked up to house current through a Dremel speed controller so that I can control the speed. And here you have spin casting tools and parts. This is a 196 pump jet. Here are the tools: cast resin, talc, part release, containments. The last technique I'm going to discuss dealing with resin casting is vacuum assisted. We're getting back to that tool that had a bunch of little figures in it. You can see the trough in the top of the tool. What I've done is that I assembled the tool after dressing it out, and then I poured in a relatively small quantity of resin, and then I put it in the vacuum machine, pulled a hard vacuum, and the trough is deep enough to account for the frothing of rather violent frothing of the resin as the vacuum is approached. This frothing is a result of the air being evacuated from the cavities within the tool. Of course, that air has to go up through the resin, and hence the frothing. Not to mention all of the free air that was chemically bound within the resin. Keep in mind, it's all still in the liquid state. So I pulled the vacuum for about 20 seconds, which is, considering the other efforts to mix and pour this stuff, means I'm right at the door of the stuff starting to make the transition, the state change from liquid to solid. So I have to work quickly. So I break the vacuum, remove the bell jar, and then I can remove the work. Usually there's no time to supplement with pressurization. So it goes back to 1 atmosphere, stays there until I'm ready to release the parts. And typically they're perfect. I haven't really had much need to augment with pressurization after vacuum.
Just a butt in there. If we're running low on time, so if you got a few slides you can skip through, maybe we can do that. Because I want to make sure we got time for people to ask questions.
Done.
Yeah, that was easy. So I have a couple of questions, or at least a couple of things. Rubber, like, you know, there's lots of places to get it, and you mentioned a couple of suppliers, but hardness. Do you want to make any comments about the shore rating of rubber? Because when people are shopping, they're going to see all of these numbers, and they may not necessarily understand what they mean.
60 shore.
So does everybody understand the shore rating? It's basically the hardness of the rubber. So, you know, if you're making simple parts, you like a hard rubber is going to be nice to work with, because you're not going to get a lot of deformation of the rubber and mating and, you know, flash and all of that fun stuff. But if you've got intricate parts with lots of undercuts and stuff, if you get hard rubber, it may become somewhat problematic to extract your master from it. So you may need to go to a softer shore rating rubber to utilize for those parts. So shore rating when you're shopping for rubber is just basically how hard it is. The lower the number, the softer and mushier the rubber is.
Is that what the unit is? Sure. Or I thought it was durometer. Is that something different?
Yeah.
That's go ahead, Dave.
Durometer typically applies to a liquid's viscosity, whereas shore is the finished item's hardness. Now you have Rockwell, you have shore, you have a bunch of European standards, and within shore there are different classifications. Shore A, shore B. Don't get too wrapped up in it. If you're going to order BJB or other typical products aimed at hobbyists and professionals, you're going to get either a 40 or a 60 shore.
I see it in O-rings when I go shopping for O-rings.
Right.
Another question for you. You're dealing with resin. Nowadays, we 3D print in resin. What's the difference in stability of the two different materials? Are they the same material?
I'm not
No.
the guy to be asking that.
No, they're not. What Dave's talking about is like a polyurethane casting resin, like a two-part resin. The resin in 3D printers is a UV cured resin. So you're not adding and mixing those. It's cured through the addition of ultraviolet radiation, which changes it from state, from a liquid to a solid. Now, at the end of the day, the performance characteristics can be very similar. In my experience, polyurethane is a little bit more forgiving from a brittleness perspective.
It has
3D
less
printing,
tensile strength.
Yeah. So the 3D printing resins, unless you start getting into the idea of mixing resins and that kind of thing, for the most part, standard resin printers, the resin is very brittle. If you drop it, it will shatter. If you try and drill it, it can chip. So what you can do to mitigate that is you can mix in soft plastic resin in various concentrations to change the brittleness of the plastics. But for the most part, the out of the box resins are pretty brittle.
Another thing to note about the resins, yes, they have less tensile strength. The UV cured SLA printing resins, they have less tensile strength and their shear is less. They, like Bob said, shatter. But also, if you like thermal inserts, I like to use a lot of thermal inserts when I create my parts. the SLA resin does not, it's more difficult to use a, let's say, a 632 or 440 threaded insert thermal, use a soldering iron to stick it in. However, PLA and ABS and filament printing accepts them real good.
Yeah, resin does not take to heat very well. It'll burn, it won't soften.
Yeah.
Now the commercial resins that I'm getting, for example, the new Nautilus kits they soften beautifully. So like for example, the hatches, they've got little arms that clip in to allow them to open and close. If you just hit them with your torch or heat gun for just like 5 seconds, you can bend out the arm, put it on, close it up, wait a couple seconds, and then it's locked into place.
They won't tell you that material though, will they?
They did. I can look it up.
Ooh.
I can look it up.
I thought they were keeping that close to their chest.
That was the other company that I was working with.
Oh, the Sharky McSharkface company?
Yeah. No, the Sharky's the new company.
That's some incredible stuff. You just have to hold it to really, it really feels good. Like it doesn't shatter like your typical SLA, right, Bob? It feels a lot tougher, a lot more forgiving.
The resin is called Somos Lido Light Yellow. I don't know if you can buy it.
Can you get a data sheet on it, and then material data sheet on it? I'm just curious. I'd like to look.
If anybody wants to look it up, there you go.
Eddie wants data.
Yeah. So I just want to do one last comment there too. So Dave talked a lot about like the techniques to create exceptionally professional parts. And so we're talking about degassing with vacuum machines and pressure pots, for forcing air bubbles out. That's best practice. Now for our applications as a hobbyist, if you're making like one-off molds and that kind of thing, in a perfect world, you would be doing that. Now, do you need to do that? Probably not. So if you're getting overwhelmed with like, oh my God, I gotta buy vacuum machines and pressure pots and air compressors and like all of this stuff, you can absolutely get away just pouring rubber, letting it cure, pulling it out, and pouring resin into the mold. Will you end up with beautiful bubble-free parts? Probably not. But you're probably only making 2 or 3 or 4 parts. So if you need to use a little filler and a little bit of sandpaper, it's probably not a big deal. Dave can't afford to do that. When he's making 100 parts, they need to pop out perfectly every time, because every air bubble is dollars out of his pocket to fix. So by all means, if you want to get into this hardcore, make your investment in vacuum. Those things are super fun to play with, by the way. Those vacuum chambers and pressure pots. But you don't need to do it. You don't need to worry about it. You can definitely get away with just grabbing rubber, resin, and clay. But that's what
Quick question for Dave. Do you think a used eBay pressure cooker would serve as a pressure pot, or you wouldn't want to chance it?
I have not had one explode on me, but I've heard stories. And since a lot of these come from China,
the Harbor Freight pressure pots that Dave put me onto, why would you screw around with buying a pressure cooker when this thing it comes all done with all the fittings and pressure gauge and everything?
Everybody here complains about price, so I'm thinking a $30 pressure cooker.
Then they're in the wrong game.
That's what I'm saying. But I don't think people are gonna.
I don't think you can pull a vacuum in a pressure cooker. That's pressure only. It's got vacuum relief. You can only go one way with a pressure cooker. I will tell you, as you know, I like to experiment. I was casting some polyurethane parts. And I said, well, what the hell? Let me see if I can degas this thing with a shop vac. The thing foamed up so bad. It was like boiling over on the, like you have your pot of potatoes boiling over on the stove and nobody watching it. It was amazing. So you have to be careful. You have to modulate it. You know what I'm saying? You just on, off, a little bit to the side, that type of thing. But you can get away with it.
Yeah, we used to call that bumping it. You just relieve the pressure just a little bit, and the bubbles just shrink back down again.
And you can use a thing called an inductor. You've got an air supply, then you can pull a vacuum with an inductor.
Oh, sure. Dave, let me ask you a question. You've done this before, obviously. Do you ever lose that feeling of victory when you open the mold and you got a perfect a perfect casting?
You cut right to my heart. No, I don't. It always feels good. Your point is well taken.
And inversely, there's nothing that is the equivalent of a knife through the heart is opening up your mold after spending all of that time and finding out it didn't fill all the way or whatever. Which we know the feeling very well.
And Ed, to your point, I'm wondering myself if you can spin cast at 33 1/3 RPM or maybe 45 RPM, as in a record player.
My old Mickey Mouse one, huh?
Well, there you go.
You probably could, but I suppose it's one of those things where the higher the RPM, the more likely you're going to divest yourself of all of the bubbles and get a full pour.
Yeah.
And one thing Dave didn't touch on, which I'm kind of surprised, is spin casting is not for the faint of heart. You need to do everything perfectly right every time, especially if you're goofing around with white metal. You will burn yourself and everybody around you if that mold has like a little pinhole in the side and you don't have a catch.
I got a story for you if you got a minute. Well, another time.
Leave us in suspense.
It's the Ellie story, right? Give him the Ellie story, please. They deserve.
All right. The first time I made a disc tool, I knew the principle because I'd worked for a jeweler for a while. And so I made my first disc tool. It's a rubber tool. I have it clamped together and I have it on a blood separation machine, the previous machine. And I made my first metal pour and I poured it in there and I'll be goddamn, it worked the first time. Almost a flash-free tree of parts. So Bob, you were talking about that joyous feeling when you well, I had that. And on that rush, I called Ellie into the shop. Said, Ellie, come here. You gotta see this is slicker than snot. You're gonna love it. Well, at this point, I had not discovered the utility of a splash shield, which is something you put around the disc to guard against any leakage. Of course, it'll spew in a perfect disc all the material if you have a leak. All right. Well, I didn't appreciate that yet. And she's a little Filipino, so my waist is where her tits are, right? So this thing's at waist level. So she's standing right next to the machine. I spin it up and I pour in the metal. And of course, the tool dislodges and sends molten metal everywhere. And Ellie made a noise only dogs could hear. And I think that was the last time she was in that shop for about a month. I couldn't drag her in there. So the moral of the story is you gotta, as Bob said, gotta get it right. You gotta get the tension on your retaining screws right, your RPMs logged for a particular tool. You gotta have a splash shield and you gotta have eye protection. not to mention everything protection when you're doing metal casting.
Gloves, aprons, face shields. Yeah.
And Dave,
Mhm.
how long were you on the couch after that one?
You lost your voice. I mean, that's just, yeah, it was awkward for a while.
Poor Ellie. God rest his soul.
So to summarize, you know, the mold making may feel like witchcraft if you haven't tried it. At the end of the day, you can go on Amazon and get it, just a cheap little, you know, 4-ounce double kit of resin and rubber, and just play with it. That's that. You know, it's not going to kill you. It's not going to hurt anything. You know, if the worst thing you could do is fuse your master into the rubber if you make some massive huge mistake. But even that's pretty hard to do, as Dave alluded to in the first thing. That rubber just doesn't stick to anything except itself. So play with it. I urge you to try it. Just find, you know, one of my first things is I molded and cast a servo horn. I just put it in some clay and poured the rubber over it, flipped it over, a simple one-piece mold, put some casting resin in it. It will remove the whole mystery behind the process, and you'll become more and more comfortable with the idea of creating all of these copies in the future if you need to. It'd be good. Like, think about it. You know, if you got a submarine and you smash a dive plane, well, you still got one. You could pop that off, you could mold it, and then now you could make a copy of the dive plane. There's lots and lots of applications. You just got to put this technique in your arsenal, you know, put it in your quiver so that, you know, you've got it if you need to. All right. We're way over our time here. So we're gonna pack it in, but I think what we're gonna do next time, what I'd like to do is we're not gonna have a session. I think we've actually pushed off a lot of times project sharing and open Q&A sessions about people's stuff going on. So I just want to leave that one open, the next one for discussion. We got some other things that we could talk about. If we end up staring at each other in the eyeballs awkwardly, we can certainly do that. But I want to get back to that next time, and then at that time I'm also going to queue back up again, because of this last trip, because I had a chance to tour 2 different shops. I want to get back to shop tours. I think it's really insightful to see into somebody's mentality via their workspace. So we're going to queue that back up, and if we need to, I can start with mine, because I don't know I've actually done a shop tour now that I'm in the house here. But we'll get a sign-up sheet if anybody wants to share their workspace, where they're working, and it could be, you know, just a desk that you're working with, or it could be, you know, a gigantic 2,000 square foot shop. I don't know. Some of you guys are on both ends of the spectrum. So that's kind of fun. And that can only take, you know, 5 or 10 minutes of walking through. Give some really good ideas for people in terms of tools and organization and storage and all sorts of stuff. So before I go, any last questions or comments?
Hey, Bob, you said for your DiveTribe members, you get your weekly updates. Everybody else has got to wait 2 weeks.
Yeah, starting on the next one. Yeah, absolutely.
Where would we see this over those people? Is there a separate place we would go for it?
I'm going to email it out. You're going to get an email that says, hey, we just dropped a new video. Here's the link. And you just click on it in your email, and you'll go. I'll start the countdown 2 weeks. Everybody else is going to need to wait for, and then I'll make it public.
Thanks.
Yep.
Which reminds me, you owe me an invoice, Bob.
Oh yeah, I should probably put that in here. All right, I got it.
I'll see you in about 10 minutes, right?
No, I need to go see my wife, because she's been waiting and texting me. Where are you? Where are you? Why aren't you here?
Oh, run.
All right, guys, I'm going to let you go. Have an awesome rest of your weekend.
Hey.
All right, bye.